We learned just at the beginning of the 12th chapter of Yevamot that we need the presence of 3 judges. They don't have to be expert judges. It can be what the Mishnah calls a bet din hediot. Hediot, of course, is cognate with our word idiot. Hediot is idiot. It doesn't mean an idiot, but it just means a normal guy. So you need 3 people for halitza to take place. We learned that, and just as any other, in common actually with monetary cases. Monetary cases are always judged by 3. And then as we close, so that's the beginning of the 12th chapter. So as we close off the 12th chapter, as we get into the 5th Mishnah, and this is really the last Mishnah that deals with process. The following one will actually just go through all the instructions, a bit like an instruction manual. So this really is the closing Mishnah in terms of, if you like, legal issues. And it begins, maybe she performed halitza in the presence of 2. So maybe we don't have 3, maybe we don't have three judges. Or bishlosha nimtza echad mehem karov or pasul. Or in the presence of 3. And one of them was a relative or was invalid for some other reason. There are certain kind of people who can't be witnesses. For example, a professional gambler or a pigeon racer or someone who trades in 7th year produce. These kind of people probably cannot serve in even a bet din hediot, even a sort of an ordinary bet din. So we haven't got our 3. And so unsurprisingly, the Mishnah is going to rule halitza psula. The halitza doesn't work. It doesn't work. We need 3. We need 3, and we need 3 kosher people to be sitting there. And of course, and actually they need to be men as well. I'm pretty sure they will need to be men. But the Mishnah doesn't even state that. Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yochanan hasandla and machshirin. Actually, Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yochanan hasandla, Rabbi Yochanan the sandal maker, actually are okay with 2 witnesses. That's very interesting, and we'll bring an example now. Maseh shel chatza shechalza ben uvein beino levein leveina. Once it happened that a man submitted to halitza beino leveina, between himself and herself. Ulebeit ha'asurin, they were in prison. So it seems there's no witnesses. The Gemara, by the way, comes along and says, no. There were 2 witnesses looking in from the outside. So the Gemara thinks this is a continuation of the situation where there are 2 witnesses. And there were 2 witnesses looking in from the outside of the cell. Maybe the original Mishnah just talked about the 2 people, him and her. It's not quite clear. But the Mishnah records, the case came before Rabbi Akiva, and he declared the halitza valid. And of course, the Gemara, when I say the Gemara, says that there were 2 people looking through the window. From a halachic point of view, the Gemara assumes there were 2 people looking through the window. So from a halachic point of view, I think the Gemara is not saying that just he and she are sufficient to witness their own halitza. I think the Gemara is saying, look, we could get away with 2 witnesses. And generally speaking, the Gemara is always going to be keen, if possible, to dissolve the bounds of Yibum. The rabbis, in practice, they don't like levirate marriage very much. So we can see why they might agree it with only 2 witnesses if there's a problem. They're not going to be purist about it. They want to help the situation get resolved. And then the Mishnah then goes on to describe, well, okay, how does it work in practice? And this is the end of the 12th chapter. Mitzvat halitza, the commandment of halitza. And now we're going to just describe the whole process with reference to the verses, by the way, because we have a description in Torah, but we're going to slightly flesh this out. So he and his deceased brother's wife, they come in front of the Beit Din. in front of the court. V'hein notnin lo eitzah et hahogen lo. And they give him advice which is appropriate to him. Because the verse says, Ve'karu lo ziknei iro ve'dibru elav. Because the verses actually say the elders of his city will call to him and speak to him. So we presume they're speaking about his responsibilities. Vehi omeret, and she says, now this is from the Pesukim, Me'ein yivabmi l'hakim la'achiv shem b'Yisrael ova yivabmi. My husband's brother, my brother-in-law, refuses to raise up a name for his brother in Israel. He will not be my Yabam. Vehu omer, and then he says, this is all in front of the Bet Din, Lo chafatzti lekachta. I do not wish to marry her. That's another quote from the Torah. And then the Mishnah goes on to say, Bilshon HaKodesh. Well, in the printed text, it's Bilshon HaKodesh Hayu Omrim. The Kaufman manuscript, and we're going on Kaufman, says Bilshon HaKodesh Vehayu Omrim. And I don't understand that ve in the middle of Hayu. He says, I do not wish to marry her, and they spoke in the holy tongue. They spoke in the holy tongue. And by the way, in the Mishnah in Sota, we will learn the Mishnah in Sota in a couple of months. And the Mishnah, the end of the Mishnah in Sota has a whole list of which, if you like, which declarations need to be made in Hebrew and which can be made in any language. So the Tefillah, for example, the Shmona Esrei can be said in any language. But this declaration has to be made in Hebrew. That's the ruling of the Mishnah in Sota. So they spoke in the holy tongue. What happens next? Veniksha Yevamot elav la'inei hazkenim v'chaltza na'alo me'al raglo. Then now we're quoting from the verses. Then his brother's widow shall go up to him in the presence of the elders and pull the sandal off his foot. Ve'yar kabafanav, and spit in his face. Rot shehu nir'eh ladayanim. It's got to be spit that the judges can see. And we've mentioned before, the Gemara learns that she doesn't actually have to spit into his face, but she does have to spit in front of him, and the judges have to see the spit. Ve'anta ve'amra. And then she's going to make this declaration, Kacha yaseh la'ish asher lo yivneh et beit achiv. Thus shall be done to the man who will not build up his brother's house. Ve'at kan hayu makre'in. And thus far they used to dictate. In other words, they wouldn't rely on the verbal knowledge of the man and the woman to make the right declaration. And we've seen the same, by the way, in the declaration of Bikurim. When you bring your first fruits to the temple, you have to declare, it's in the Seder actually, Arami Oved Avi. My father was wandering Aramean, etc., etc., etc. But some people didn't know Hebrew. And so they used to, if you like, dictate the declaration. So one of the priests would be standing there on the altar, and he would say word for word the declaration. Arami Oved Avi, Vayered Mitzrayim, Vayagor Sham. My father, my wandering Aramean was my father. And then the pilgrim would repeat. And the Mishnah over there in Bechorot explains that in order not to embarrass those who didn't know, in fact, the halacha was that the priest would kind of dictate to everybody. Everybody would repeat after the priest, whether they knew Hebrew or not. And it seems that we're following the same process here. At kan hayu makre'in. So someone would read out the declaration, and the man or the woman would recite after them. Ukshehokra Rabbi Hyrcanus tachat ha'elah bikfar akus. And when Rabbi Hyrcanus was under the terebinth at Kfar, this is Kfar Akus. I shouldn't have translated it as Kfar Eitam. It's Kfar Akus. Begamar et Kol Parsha. He actually completed reading the complete section. In other words, he read out, he dictated the whole of the section. The practice was established to dictate the entire section. So in other words, the whole recitation they needed to recite was dictated for them. So they didn't need to know Hebrew fluently. Veni crush more Israel beit halitza na'al, and he shall go in Israel by the name of the family that had the shoe loosened. The family that had the shoe loosened. Mitzvah badayanim velo mitzvah batalmidim. That is a commandment for the judges and not for the disciples. So it seems somehow that the judges are going to call out, oh yeah, you're now the man that had the shoe loosened. But the disciples don't have to call that out. And Rabbi Yehuda actually is going to disagree. And we can see there's this sort of, there seems to be this, what Rabbi Yehuda describes is, if you like, a mass public shaming. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, mitzvah kol ha'omdim sham. Rabbi Yehuda says it's a commandment incumbent on everybody standing there to say, chalutz hana'al, he that had his shoe loosened, he that had his shoe loosened. And in fact, in the printed text, you even say this 3 times. Chalutz hana'al, chalutz hana'al, chalutz hana'al. He that had his shoe loosened or his sandal loosened, he that had his sandal loosened, he that had his sandal loosened. Everybody calls it out. Everybody shouts it out.